Toda virada é um recomeço. Um momento que nos lembra que nada vai ser igual. Porque não importa o quão virado o mundo tá. Toda segunda-feira vira final de semana. Todo agosto vira setembro. E todo inverno vira primavera. É tempo de celebrar cada noite que vira dia. Cada cicatriz que vira história. Cada sonho que vira realidade. Primavera, verão Renner. Virada dos sonhos.
Poder fazer escolhas significa conquistar um dos maiores desejos da humanidade, a independência. E o Sebrae abre as portas para pessoas que escolheram a independência e transformaram sonhos em projetos de vida, que ajudam a gerar empregos, desenvolver a sua comunidade e a transmitir a cultura empreendedora no país. Um lugar onde todos têm liberdade para escolher, inclusive escolher empreender. Sebrae, a força do empreendedor brasileiro.
Sejam todos bem-vindos. Hoje a gente vai ter um painel muito especial aqui para falar um pouco sobre gestão produtiva, ética de moda artesanal, com dois convidados muito especiais, Jack Corlett e Dr. James Vreeland. Eu sou a Júlia, do Instituto Ecotece, que é uma organização não governamental que existe para moda ética e sustentável, e que daqui a pouco eu vou falar um pouquinho mais. Jack and James, I'm gonna read the description of you in Portuguese for them, and then I'll start in English with you, ok? Bom, para apresentar um pouco os nossos convidados, então, vou contar aqui sobre Jack Corlett. Criar conexões dinâmicas entre as marcas orientadas para o design e os tecelões profissionais de Bangladesh é a missão de Jack Corlett. Desde 1989, Jack vive e trabalha com comunidades artesanais especializadas em cestaria, bordado e cerâmica. Mas os têxteis feitos à mão são a sua paixão. Sua empresa de costura baseada em comércio justo e produção de pequenos lotes de tecido, a Motif, foi criada em 98. A empresa cria artigos para moda e casa, aliando materiais naturais ou reciclados, com habilidades tradicionais. Em 2019, a Motif Handmade foi levada aos Estados Unidos para trazer essa rede de décadas de artesãos profissionais de confiança para uma base de cliente e designers que buscam autenticidade, transparência e excelência em seus fornecedores. Essa é Jack da Motif. Dr. James Vreeland, da Naturtex. Pegar carona ao redor do mundo nos anos 60 o levou aos Andes peruanos. Lá, ele descobriu uma nova terra e cultura que parecia ter um potencial têxtil artesanal ilimitado. Completou o doutorado em antropologia no Instituto de Estudos Latino-Americanos na Universidade do Texas, Austin, e retornou ao Peru para fundar a Naturtex Eko Peru, em 1997. Sua missão é apoiar as comunidades indígenas e camponesas locais para obter benefícios econômicos ao produzirem, do cultivo ao produto final, cerca de 450 variedades têxteis exclusivas sobre os princípios do comércio orgânico e justo. Bom, agora eu vou começar a falar em inglês para a gente começar a nossa interação aqui. Well, Now in English. I apologize because my English is not so good, but it's okay. It's an honor to be here with you. I didn't know about Motif or Naturtex, and for me it was a great gift just to know and to be here with you. Listen, your experience makes me more inspired. I am Julia from Ecotece Institute. I'm the director of Ecotece Institute, which is a Brazilian NGO that has been operating since 2005 in the area of sustainable fashion. Our mission is to inspire new logics of production and consumption so that fashion can be more ethical, clean, and inclusive. We work in three fronts: education and culture, development of the educational projects of sustainable fashion, and support for the preservation of traditional cultures. Social action, income generation, technical development, and productive management of groups in a situation of socio-economic vulnerability. And fashion production, consulting and product development with social, cultural, and environmental principles with fashion brands. Well, now I introduce myself and Ecotece. I want to listen to you. Motif and Naturtex has a beautiful way of making fashion, connecting to the basis with people who has a lot of knowledge of traditional techniques. You show me that when we connect ourselves in a network, valuing diversity and collective actions, fashion becomes a thriving chain. So I wanna ask Jackie to begin to speak to us, tell about Motif, tell about you, and tell about ethical productive management of handmade fashion, which is our theme for today. We have 15 minutes for each one of you for this moment, okay?
Great. Julia, thank you so very, very much for such a great introduction, and your English is fantastic. My Portuguese is non-existent, so I thank you that I can be here with you all in English. Let me start to share my screen now, because I'd like to kind of introduce myself in the context of what we're talking about. So I may as well start off with the images straight away, okay? Well, I think what I'd really like to start with is a question. I'd like to ask you, why are you here? How did you get here? Because every single one of us is in this space with a story. We've all come because there's been some kind of an aha moment of some sort. To kind of put in context where I'm coming from in terms of this subject of ethical production management of artisanal fashion, it's important to know our why. There's all kinds of resources out there to be able to get the how-tos, but the why is really vital in ethical fashion, because above everything, ethical fashion has to be about respectful relationships, and that's with people and with our planet. And that respect goes throughout the whole process, not just in production management. So for myself, I moved to Bangladesh in 1989. I'd trained as a textile designer in the UK and had worked a few years freelance, and had the opportunity to go to Bangladesh and work with weavers to help create more export orientated fabrics. And that was going really well. And I was in a weaving workshop one day. Looms were clacking away, the guys were singing, keeping rhythm. It was all humid and dusty, and I just thought, wow, this is it. This is what I want to do. Because in London, it was great. People loved your fabrics. But here, the fabrics these guys were producing, they were going for an order in Holland, I think it was. I knew with it being a fair trade agency, they were getting paid well, their kids were in good schools, they were healthy. There was all kinds of good stuff happening as a result of weaving through my designs or anybody else's designs. And that was it. I was hooked, and I'm still hooked. So that was a long time ago, 1989. But that was kind of how I came to be living and working amongst the weavers of Bangladesh. It's been an incredible journey and continues to be, especially as over these last decades, we've seen this awareness of sustainability, of fair trade, of ethical sourcing really begin to gain momentum. And now all of you who are attending here definitely are in this groove, which is fantastic to be a part of. As Julia mentioned earlier, my real mission is about connecting designers and brands with the wealth of production that is possible in Bangladesh ethically and with artisanal production. Why? Because I believe fair trade, handmade goods really check all the bases. It means that brands can have transparent supply chains. It means that makers can have healthy families. And frankly, it means that our planet gets a break because the whole system facilitates good environment. This PDF that I've put together, I'll touch on in towards the end a little bit. But for now to know, one of the key elements in ethical production management of artisanal fashion has to be clear communication. Clear communication in everything, clear communication of expectations and of processes. That PDF I've put together so that designers who are not used to working with hand-woven fabrics can really get an understanding of how simple it is to create your own fabrics, your own hand-woven fabrics, and something of the process that's involved in that. So that is the clearest communication at the start, so that people know the colors that they have to work with, the kind of structures that they can work with. So from working with the designers, first of all, is where production management starts. The base that I use is working with recycled yarns that are created from garment factory waste. Yarns that are fabric that's broken down into fiber, then twisted into yarn, and is then hand woven into the fabrics that we create at Motif Handmade. So at the moment, obviously, we are relying on a wasteful industry in order to do this. There will come a tipping point where industries are less wasteful. Sadly, that's probably a long way off yet, but that's where we're heading to. As you can see, we've got computers here and we're working face-to-face, but it is very straightforward nowadays to work remotely, as we are even right now. Ethical production of artisanal fashion also means learning each other's production language. Learning a few phrases in each other's language is also good, but for example, I had to unlearn all the universal notation for weaving designs that I had learned at college and was using professionally. Weaving community in Bangladesh had their own traditional way of keeping their notes of their structures and things. I didn't have to learn all of them, but I had to adapt the way that I could communicate design so that the weavers I was working with could still work at the level of skill that they are used to. So be prepared and recognize that this building up of resources amongst the people that are producing our goods is really vital, and having an understanding that for all of us it's the same. We don't know what we don't know, right? So just enter into these relationships with humility and recognize that often at least one person in the mix is working in at least their second or third language. So just bear all of that in mind. The other important element to remember is timing, because you have to be realistic about timeframes. You can't have slow fashion fabrics and production at fast fashion speeds. Now, obviously, there's a whole education element going on here that our customer base has to become more aware of and buy into. But weather is a huge factor in artisanal production. The seasons, what's happening. Do all hands have to be on deck to be able to bring the harvest in? Is the monsoon heavy? There are certain times of the year in Bangladesh, it takes 3 or 4 times longer to dry the yarn than it does at others. So these are things that we need to keep in mind, because they're the reality that we're dealing with. And as we move forward in ethical production, it's the realities that we have to be real about. The other element to really take into consideration is what happens with your production and your raw materials. It's up to you to do your due diligence on people's certifications and the various systems that are required in order to do that. At Motif, we are a fair trade registered company in Bangladesh with Ekota Fair Trade Forum. That's the national fair traders. They are themselves a member of the WFTO, the World Fair Trade Organization. And so we move in that sphere. So it's important as you move forward as designers and engaging with artisanal producers that you have confidence in the various systems that are being used for production, both of your raw materials and of your finished goods. We are able to supply ethical small batch manufacturing as well at Motif. And so these are the other things to include in your planning. There's the production of materials, then there's the production of the finished goods. And then finally, there's the element of shipping. The most eco-efficient means of shipment is by sea. So from Bangladesh to the US, for example, where I'm based, that's about a 6 to 8 week shipment. I usually give that window. It can be a little bit quicker, but you never know. So that also has to be planned in, because like I said, the eco impact of sea shipment is so much less than by air. Obviously, there are offset systems that you can use, but that's very much what it's the planning that has to be a key part of production management with artisanal production, as with any production, but very specifically with that. So this is a beautiful, you might know this is an ECAT fabric, which is very, very special. The Tide Warp and the Tide Weft dyed with indigo. Absolutely beautiful. Actually, that's the stuff that's behind me here as well. So then the other thing that I would say, please, 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 is get to see your production team as soon as you can. When you are involved in artisanal production, this is not about machinery. People are creating with their own hands, with their own skills, with traditions that may have been passed down for generations in some cases. In some cases, people may be learning these skills for the first time in their families as a form of income generation. But there are different ways in which people are absolutely the core of what is happening in your production. So make that a reality and a priority, that build it into your budget, whatever it takes, as soon as you can actually get to visit your team, because it will be a gear change for you in your understanding of what happens in that environment, but also for your team. that they will know that you're serious about this relationship moving forward. I just wanted to say that when you're engaged with your team, that is the mark that is going to set you apart. There's so much that happens in the greenwashing in these days that people will say, oh yes, we're fair trade, we are committed to ethical production. And one year when hand weaving might be really the trend, great, they've got a fantastic production going on with hand weavers. Next season, perhaps it's batik that is the trend. So they'll move their order from Bangladesh to, say, Indonesia, where there's a different style of handcrafting. What happens to all the people that have been trained up for that huge order in Bangladesh? They no longer have work. They've been trained up in these skills to be able to do things. And I have seen this over the years happen. And that's all well and good for the people in Bali, Indonesia, wherever it is. But what about next year when the trend is for embroidery and they go somewhere else? Ethical fashion at its core has to be about relationship and about continuing these relationships and being committed to them in all the ups and downs that happen. So I really would just encourage you to move along with that as your modus operandi. As I mentioned, I have on my website, motifhandmade.com, this download, which is free to download just for your email to put you on a list. You'll be able to see simply how to create fair trade handmade fabrics. You can be on our list for little mini mails of encouragement. And you also get a link to be able to book a call with me, which I'm really happy to engage with any kind of questions that you might have for going forward with ethical production with artisanal products. So yeah, I think one of the things I would really encourage you as ethical designers moving forward, coming in now, you are at a stage in this whole process which is mind-blowing. It's like through the pandemic, this whole understanding of supply chains has gone on fast forward. So those of us, like Dr. James as well, who've been in this scene for decades, we are so excited to see the opportunities and resources that you now have at your fingertips to be able to move this forward exponentially. So would really encourage you to do that. It's going to be tough. It's going to be hard because the wheel is still turning. But I would say continue in a vein of being humble, honest, hardworking, and keep respecting the people and the planet in the process. That's what I'd encourage you with going forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I like it a lot because you bring a holistic way of caring of production. You showed a lot of steps we can do and try to care. Okay, Dr. James Vreeland, please tell us about your history, about Naturtex and about ethical production management in handmade fashion.
Thank you very much. Let me first remove my mask because I am in close quarters. It was actually made with some artisan production. But I want to say how difficult it is to follow a presentation by Jackie Corlett. I was honored to share the palestra, the stage with her at Common Objective Expo, and with those images and with that really inspiring educational presentation. It's very heartening to see and to hear and to learn how complex it is to create and continue the engagement with the primary producers in their continent, in their geography, and respect their culture and their current socio-political conditions. So thank you, Julia, also for putting us together with our team our brand manager, Gigi Cobos in Brooklyn, here in Lima. And I must also say, Jackie is the only one of us that speaks English, so pardon my errors. Let me segue right back to Jackie and respond, why is a gringo from New York in Peru in the first place? How did I get here? And what were the reasons for hitchhiking around and ending up in the Andes? I know nothing about fashion. I'm an archaeologist. I hitchhiked to Peru 3 times from my university in the United States. I came here in the Woodstock generation era because I was fed up with international economic development. I didn't think it was working. It hasn't worked. And look at Afghanistan, look at Bangladesh. So I came for a fresh view. But I also had the background of an immigrant who came to the United States from Germany, my grandfather, who set up in 1913 in Brooklyn, Hummel, which is my mother's name, and Robinson, to import chemicals from Switzerland. They were the first aniline dyes. So I thought, wow, I'm not very suited as an archaeology to work with dye. So let's take a look at what we have in the Andes, where I showed up on horseback and took with me one of the phrases. I guess my only connection to fashion is that my great aunt Diana Vreeland, who was editor of Vogue for a number of years and worked at the Fashion Institute, said something that was really pithy. Don't think you were born too late. Everyone has that illusion, but you aren't. The only problem is if you think too late, and that's where we start. So immediately upon arrival in Peru in 1969, of course, Jackie wasn't born yet. We're the old timers here. These are the fabrics that were created 2,000 years ago and visible in many of the finest museums around the world. Look at these fabrics, embroidered, multicolored mantles that show, in this case, a dancing figure with his or her head thrown back, and in colors that my grandfather's anilines from Switzerland probably couldn't have replicated. And certainly 2,000 years later, they wouldn't look like this. So I was mesmerized by the nature of the archaeological background that could lead me into finding ways to revive and reutilize some of what I call, as an archaeologist, paleotechnologies. And let's move on. So our first step before we began the company, it was more Naturtex. It was more of an NGO. And we looked at alpaca. Of course, that lovely fabric we just saw was largely alpaca weft and embroidery yarns with cotton warp. So we began working with the high altitude alpaca pastoralists, where the alpaca was domesticated maybe 8,000 or more years ago. And these pastoralist families live above 4,000 meters above sea level. It's incredible how they have adapted. And when the Spanish, Europeans, the outsiders crashed into the Andes in 1532, they had no idea that the wealth of Peru was not on the coast, it was in the Andes. The more alpaca you had, the more wealthy you were in a communal sense. You had resources to redistribute and generate safety and security against risks, a concept that is lost today in development. Cotton is really important, of course. We saw with Jackie's presentation, fabrics that were also made of cotton. And as far as I am aware as an archaeologist, the oldest finds of ancient fabrics still come from northern Peru in the desert, where they're marvelously conserved. And we see these two fragments in the upper frame with colored cotton yarns. The yellow is a kind of alder plant that's found close to the ocean. And the blue is that same indigo that we saw in the extraordinarily beautiful and fashionable ikats that Motif has created or recreated in Bangladesh. And both of these dyes we use, as well as the insect, it's not a plant dye on the right, the cochineal, to dye cotton as well as alpaca. Now, what about this cotton? There's cotton in Bangladesh, there's cotton all around the world, but they aren't the same cottons. There are actually 4 species of domesticated cotton found worldwide, and India is 1 species, another one in Northern Africa, a 3rd in Central America, and a 4th in the Andes. And that's the ball, the lock in the upper left, which has distinctive features. First of all, it has much more fiber. The locks or the balls can weigh up to 9 or 10 grams. It's almost double the weight of cotton produced in these other ancestral cotton production areas. But most fascinating, I think, is that little ribbon at the top, where you see a twisted, sort of a DNA looking figure. And that's actually a fiber of cotton. And in the center, in the lumen, which is hollow, it's a hollow space, there's pigment. So cotton in ancient Peru came in colors. So my grandfather didn't need to send chemicals to Peru because cotton came in colors. Now, hitchhiking along the Pan American Highway in the early 70s, I bumped into this, what looked like a highway roadkill, a crash and flee accident of an individual that was just smashed down. But it turned out to be a pre-Columbian mummy that was vandalized. And to the left of the skeleton, you see an indigo shroud or mantle, maybe about 1,000 years old. That indigo color has survived really well. And even more startling to me were these locks above the head of cotton in different shades of brown. Well, if it had all deteriorated at the same time, it would all be muddy and gray. But no, they were brown, tan, white, and other colors. So I said, wow, could color really be in this cotton? There's a fabric to the lower right, which shows the colored cotton, no dyes of any kind. And the tapestry to the lower left is actually a fragment of a fabric we found in the desert that shows an ancient Peruvian cotton plant blooming and exuding colored cotton fibers. Where can we find these remnants? I started looking for them in the jungle. This is the Amazon jungle of eastern Peru, about 600 meters above sea level. And we see a Quechua-speaking indigenous woman collecting locks from a tree of cotton. That tree is about 5 meters tall. And to harvest it, she has to pull it and bend it down to gather the locks and put them in her basket. On the right is a man who also is collecting cotton locks. You see the size of the locks in front of him in brown and behind in white. But one of the most complicated situations in the Andean jungle is the narco-terrorism, the illicit cocaine extraction. And the young woman in pink in the bottom is working for a cocaine cartel from Colombia with brown cotton. What we did in the early 90s at the invitation of the Peruvian government is to try to substitute the illegal cultivation of coca leaf with the legal production of brown cotton, which is native to the region. So this young woman is harvesting a field of about 1 hectare of beautiful brown cotton in what we have called our drug-free cotton project. Now there you can see the men folk bringing the bags of brown cotton down to a river. They're plunked into a dugout canoe and they are paddled down to the gin. It's really an extraordinary tour, excursion to see how beautiful this work is. But it's women's work. Below, on the right, you see a young woman collecting those brown locks of cotton as big as her palm. Maybe they're twice or thrice the size of cotton around the world. And women on the left with a child selecting them by colors. Here is the first anthropological problem. The men collect the revenues from the sale of the cotton. Women are not permitted to participate in the commerce of the resources which they collect. This is something that both Jackie and I have to deal with at the base level all the time. So I needed to find a way to generate income for the women because they are the providers of the domestic household economy. The men go out, half of it is spent, they never bring it home, they're probably inebriated anyway because they cannot, the Andean Indians cannot process alcohol. They go crazy. That's why alcohol in America is called firewater. They go on fire. So I saw that branch above the young woman's head and I said, can't we turn these into something at the household level? And I said, okay, let's make pencils. So here's another group of indigenous families in another part of Peru with their children. Okay, we're fair trade certified since 2005, but I believe in children's work. So there are the pencils, and actually I'm not sure if I can show them here, but we emblazon them with the logo of our clients' companies, so they can be given out free at fairs when you have presential fairs again, or as mnemonic devices to clients who visit our premises. So we began by collecting the seeds of naturally colored cotton all around Peru. And these are the colors that showed up. Not one of these fibers, skeins of fiber, has been dyed. Brown, chocolate, green, and mauve. Maybe there are more colors. We have to continue to do research. So we multiply them in an experiment station, and we return them to the communities that lost those seeds or that germplasm because of modernization. So we encourage them to incorporate them back into their plots, along with food crop without replacing them. Notice the corn, notice the beans under the fellow who's sitting. The cotton grows in that cycle that Jackie mentioned, that you have seasonality. The cotton is the last to mature, so it goes in with the corn and the beans, but it's harvested after the corn and beans has been removed. With the demand for the organic cotton, we started the first fair trade cotton force or company in the Americas in 2005 with an association called APAIM for Pima cotton production. And we were able to accumulate large stocks of fair trade certified organic Pima cotton in the upper right, as well as the brown cotton from the jungle. And we began spinning them using technology on the coast, because here you cannot only use artisan production. If you want to attend an international demand, you have to have an industrial component as well. Our third, more recent experiment, back in the jungle. As an anthropologist, this is of course before COVID, I'm not with a mask. Just before lockdown in early 2020, I found another variety of cotton called kidney cotton, because of the peculiar way the seeds are conglomerated together in a little pack that looks like a human kidney. The plant in the back is kidney cotton. And the indigenous Shipibo, Conibo Indians, which live in this part of the Amazon jungle, collect the cotton, and they create extraordinary materials with this fine fiber, which we have also been able to spin industrially, create t-shirts, and bring them back to the Shipibo, Conibo communities in Yarinacocha, where they dye the t-shirts as well as fabric and other materials with some of their locally collected dye plants. Let's start from the bottom. The bottom t-shirt was dyed with coca leaf, one of my favorites. Coca leaf makes a great dye. The second from the bottom is a jungle, it's an Amazon fruit, an edible fruit called huito, and it makes that lovely sort of baby blue steely color. Then we have the green, which is a spinach and other green leafy vegetables, which have a lot of chlorophyll and dye green. Then we have a sort of a light brown or tawny color, which was dyed by mango. The yellow piece above it was divided by pecan, and the kind of brick red to the top by mahogany bark. All of the colors are very stable. They're 3.5 on the Swiss scale of solidity, which is really pretty good. In the bottom frame, what we really try to do here is to document the intergenerational transfer of these paleo technologies. The grandmother, you might see her back behind the camera, is teaching the children how to paint designs on fabric. The famous Shipibo designs you see on pottery and on embroidered and painted fabric, and many of the craft distribution points around the world. But the young kids are not interested in learning unless there's some incentive from the outside that returns to them the urgency and the beauty of what they're doing. So they're recreating designs on some fabric. They're painting them in small rectangular figures, which we later cut and create masks for COVID. So this is one of the ways that the indigenous paleo technologies, with their own craftsmanship and in their communities, without separating the children from their parents, has an opportunity to develop products for the outside world. Now here's a final image, a vignette of the different fabrics and apparel which Naturtex creates. The upper image is of an Israeli leisure wear company called Sila. Lower left is the fair trade alpaca and natural colors, and lower right, the cotton dyed with low impact dyes. So in sum, that's what we have in our, we'll talk about certifications and organic fair trade requirements and all these other important pieces of the puzzle in the next phase. Thank you. I enjoyed sharing these modest experiments and advances that Naturtex has created over the last 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you, James. It is so nice to see the cotton, so beautiful. Well, here in Brazil, we have a colorful cotton, but it's not natural, I think. It's something created.
Actually, I've been there. We've been invited a number of times to explore in Brazil. We also presented our research in Quixadá in a textile exchange, organic exchange symposium, as well in Paraguay. And Brazil does have a naturally colored brown cotton called moco, M-O-C-O, moco, which is found in the sertão. But it doesn't produce much fiber. And as far as I know, commercially, it hasn't been sort of recovered to be industrialized without disconnecting it with the local communities.
Okay. Nice.
It's there.
You know more than me.
No, I just travel.
No, nice. Well, now we are going to our second round, and I'm gonna make some questions for you. And I loved to hear you all, your histories and your journey is beautiful. And it's making me believe that is a way to create a fashion chain that is transforming. Well, James, Dr. James, I have a question for you. And also, this question would be nice for you also, Jackie, but we thought a lot of another one for you. But okay, how to solve the balance between the maintenance of traditional techniques of production, planting, harvesting, weaving, dyeing, with the demand of a market for quick process and fast production? Well, so this is my question for you, and we have 5 minutes for this. It's a difficult question.
Thank you, Julia. The more difficult the questions, the better. And I know Jackie already touched on this.
Yes.
About seasonality, about the fact that you can't have all your resources all the time, all year round, and how you manage to solve this parsing out of production with demand. Our presentation is a complement to that of motif. What we have focused on more is on the ancestral fibers and the paleo technologies that are available in these unusually rich historical geographic areas, like the Andes, like the Indian, Pakistan continent. They're survivals of these really important traditions that are dying out. We don't have any in the United States anymore, and I imagine in Great Britain it's difficult too. So instead of looking outward and towards a designer, which is the motif approach, and markets, what we do is try to find the products that are already being made with certain success and continuity that we can adjust in a very minor way and make them available in two dimensions: the craft dimension, the handmade, the artisanal production, complemented with the industrial as well. I discovered many years ago as an archaeologist and anthropologist that the artisan production in these communities, as beautiful as this, is extraordinarily expensive. Naturally colored fibers, hand spun, hand woven, some hand dyed, are so expensive that it's difficult to convince people in the boutiques to invest in them. If they do, it's an occasional piece, very designer, very expensive. So it's not really the motor for development that I'm looking for. So what can we do to increase the production of the raw materials, the fibers, both alpaca and cotton and natural colors, and create a surfeit, an excess, so that the artisans have the raw materials first with more abundance, and with the excess that we can create, direct that towards the industrial production channel. So that really is where the demand is coming from. And there you can break out of the cycle of seasonality. One of the most, I think most of the advantageous situation that Peru has is that it's the only country I know of you can harvest cotton all year round in 4 different regions. The brown comes from one region, the green from another, the mauve from another, and the white from another. So they're all coming at different times. So first of all, it's not a big, it doesn't compress and deplete your resources, your cash flow. You can purchase them when they're available with all the premiums and begin working with them in sequence. That's really important. So we try not to make any changes. We're not really authorized. I'm not, as an archaeologist and anthropologist, to make maverick modifications that I don't know if they'll work. Our approach is simple. If you find something that's working really well, extend a hand and thank them. Don't give the communities a handout. That's the first step towards creating a paternalistic relationship, a hierarchical relationship, where you start telling them what to do, and that won't work. Right away, the conversation starts to deteriorate. I become a Dr. Vreeland and not just, an anthropologist asking silly questions. So they take me in as a kind of silly guy. He doesn't know anything. He wouldn't survive here because he asked questions that any school child knows the answers to. So you can integrate properly. And that's what I love about it. And also very, very sad that because of COVID, the profession of the anthropologist is becoming very difficult to continue, because we cannot go into these communities where the vaccines are not available. We have to work from a distance. There are a few communities which I can. I just visited 2 of our areas last week where the protection levels are higher. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Nice. Do you want to add something, Jackie? I have another question for you, but if you want to add something to this question about the balance of traditional techniques with fast process.
I am in awe, truly, James, of the incredible depth and tenacity with which Naturtex has just, I don't know, permeated into the whole system there of finding and reintroducing these incredible vital elements to culture that it's I mean it is, isn't it? I mean, I think that's one of the things that we're seeing the world over now, is that people really are waking up to the fact that, hang on a minute, if we had all actually been paying attention a couple of generations ago, we wouldn't have found ourselves in the mess we're in today. And so, you know, that's part of what I'm getting at when I speak about being humble as we go into these different situations now. It's yeah, as Dr. James said, it can be too easy to fall into this paternalistic, like, oh, I've got the answers, what I can bring in can really help you, with all the best intentions in the world. But best intentions don't prevent problems, and oftentimes they can be the source of them. So yeah, I just really appreciate the integrity with which Naturtex has moved forward in just the amazing development of resources. Yeah, thank you very, very much.
Yeah, it's incredible way to relate ourselves with all that are in the chain together with us. So Jackie, how I want to know more about the productive relationships with Motif's different productive centers. Are they partners, suppliers, or are they employees? Could you explain how the productive management of garments take place with these other centers? I want to know more how flows this production, and how does Motif manage to maintain the values of ethics and sustainability based on fair trade among all these participants?
Yeah, production in Bangladesh, it's something that, as we have now come through and we are coming full cycle to see the full impact of the Industrial Revolution, and we are seeing the Industrial Revolution work out in its most desperate final impacts, the destruction of cultures, the destruction of environments. There's so much that's happened. But what there is also, what I value about what Dr. James says as well, there is a place for industrial. Just because we're speaking about artisanal does not mean it's at the expense of industrial, because we're in this world now. We're in this world, and what's important is to learn well the lessons of the best parts of the Industrial Revolution, the best parts of productivity, of being able to manage resources and timing. All of these kind of elements we can learn well from industry. When we come to marry that with artisanal production, that is where the actual techniques used in industrial and artisanal, appropriately paired together, can work wonderfully. What doesn't pair so well together are the people that tend to be involved in artisanal production and industrial production, the business owners, the industrialists. It's that motivation that we're looking at trying to pair in these processes as well. And so that's what creates the biggest challenges with anything in the world. It's the people, right? We're all part of it. And so when we are looking at bringing together different artisanal groups, what we're also looking at is the appropriate use of technology in those different systems that are being made. So, for example, Bangladesh, sadly, no longer grows its own cotton due to, oh my goodness, from the British Raj in India back, all kinds of reasons. Bangladesh no longer has cotton, but it does have jute as a result of the Industrial Revolution, and is ideally situated to produce the top quality jute in the world. So we have a lot of very strong natural fibers, plant fibers in Bangladesh. Just the geography and everything yields itself to strong natural fibers. What we also have now from the industrial development, Bangladesh is the third largest producer of garments in the world. It was second until recently. Vietnam has now taken over. But that's only to China. The size of China and the tiny little nations of Bangladesh and Vietnam are second to China, which tells you how much production is happening, which means there's a huge amount of waste coming from the garment factories. So what we're doing at Motif is, at a very small scale, we cannot do it at the large scale, but we're partnering with a company called Cyclo. And what they do is they take the cut fabric waste from the garment factories. These orders get processed in the tons. So you'll have, say, for example, a ton of red cotton fabric that has gone through, and you get all the waste from it, all the offcuts. That's broken down into fiber, turned into yarn, as I was saying earlier. And so we get then red hand woven, red yarn, woven directly into the fabrics, which means that our fabrics are zero waste, zero toxicity because there's no new dye happening, and zero carbon because they're hand produced. And like my big aim in terms of this marrying of the artisanal and the industrial, in Bangladesh, when I first got there in '89, there were over 1 million hand weavers at work. And even then it was declining. There's now not even a third of that. The infrastructure is there for us to be able to gear this up again. And I believe that the companies that are truly interested in holistic, sustainable raw materials, we can supply hand-woven fabrics directly to the garment factories and cutting out all kinds of transport that happens in fabric. So yeah, that's kind of like my huge goal of trying to integrate these two elements of the industrial and the artisanal in Bangladesh. I know that's not completely answered all of your question, but that's kind of part of it.
It's okay. That's the talk is fluid. We don't have to control it. It's beautiful because of that. Okay, the third round now. Dr. James. Naturtex was the first organization to be fair trade certified in America. How was the process, and how does the seal support the relationship with Naturtex network of production? And how is the elaboration of product prices into this network of workers in the chain that the seals promote?
Thank you, Julia. But first, let me thank Jackie for the incredibly generous and probably exaggerated accolades about Naturtex. It's really what we have heard. We're sharing it with our team and mostly with those on the ground that Jackie talks about and focuses her attention on. Those are the real heroes and heroines, those on the ground that are staying with traditions that bring self-respect and a sense of place in their communities. This is where being gringos helps. When you go into a community and you're obviously ethnically or racially distinct, and they associate you with the developed world in the West, if you show interest in what they're doing, they recover their self-respect. They recover interest in what they're doing because there's an outside demand that their communities probably no longer have. I'm really appalled to go around these rather isolated communities and see the kids walking to elementary school where they'll learn almost nothing with Mickey Mouse knapsacks on their back, with an idea that that's the future, to be like these animated cartoons. It's very, very, very disheartening. So there's a place for us to help reestablish self-respect and self-sustenance at the community level. We might think that the presentations from Motif and Naturtex are really distinct. Sure, we're going across continents and very different cultures and totally different historical backgrounds, but there's so many important commonalities in what I've learned from Jackie today that are worth emphasizing. And we'll get to certification, which is another can of worms. We both focus on the importance of local traditions and craftspersonship.
And also humanity. Also.
Yes, with all those elements. Exactly, Julia, yes. And we both share, I think, a vision, which I call in a phrase, high touch, not high tech. It's the handwork that is valuable that has to be recovered. The engagement with the team is fundamental for all of us to share the values as well. So you asked about certification and the production of cotton fiber in Peru. I hate to dispel unpleasant truths, as Al Gore said. And this brings us into certification. You can purchase certificates in Peru, and you can domesticate imported Asian fibers and yarns all the time. Peru exports, and I know this because I look at the export registers through the National Customs Watch platform. Peru probably exports 50 to 60 times more textile produce than it has cotton to create. Where is it coming from? India, China. How do you do that? Simple. Your company A imports from China or India fiber or yarn, could be organic, maybe not. Once it's in the country, you sell it to company B. Company B domesticates it as if it were from Peru. Create stuff, and it goes to the Chamber of Commerce where certificates of origin are issued. And this is my next sort of Woodstock, heart on the sleeve battle. I have to go to these certification bodies with my war paint on and say, look, you're certifying 20, 30, 40 times more production in cotton than you can demonstrate to me that Peru has produced. So you are in cahoots, in collaboration with fraudulent certification. And they're going to turn red like tomatoes, which were created in Peru years ago. And they're going to start looking into this fraudulent certification. We also know, Jackie, I guess, is also informed that late last year, Textile Exchange uncovered a massive certification fraud in India, where 20,000 tons, let me be clear, not 20,000 kilos, 20,000 tons of conventional cotton was exported from India as organic. That's in all the stores in Sao Paulo, San Francisco, Sydney, Seattle, wherever it needs to be. It's going to be there. It's going to be everywhere. And we have to clear up this problem with false certification. How do we do it? Jackie already tipped us off. Due diligence. How do you create due diligence in your production chain? It's fairly simple. You invite your clients, your brands, not just curiosity seekers or tourists, to come visit your production sites during harvest, if possible. And in Peru, we harvest, as I said before, at 4 different seasons. So our next excursion, you're all invited, is late October, 1 week in the countryside in northern Peru in the desert to see the beginning of the organic pima harvests. If you speak Spanish, better, because then you can talk to the farmers, to the peasants, to the indigenous communities without an interpreter who would be playing around with the nuances, the conversation. Where are you hiding the chemicals? And where are those kids? Where did you put them? So I can't see them on the table. And let them tell you privately how it works. So certification in terms of documents, even though it's necessary, we all pay huge fees to do it, really isn't supplying the confidence that I need to my clients or the brands that buy from us. We want them to see it and have their own experience. They go back with great images, great histories, great stories, which are so important to differentiate what each of us is doing. If you have a great story, like Motif and like other companies that work from the ground up, the Chinese or whatever can't clone those stories. They can't invent things and stick them on there. They can try to, but it doesn't work. So having a geographical source, a cultural, historical tradition behind you, and a grasp of what's going on at the grassroots level is really what I think creates the ingredients to make this work, along with great design. This is where I think Motif and Naturtex are very distant. We don't have great designs. We don't have the great colors. We don't have textile designers like Jackie, who can introduce new and maybe more attractive, not to use the fashionable materials. So let me give the microphone back to Jackie. But before we go, I want to show you some quickly, just a few things that we do. I actually wear them. Ha ha ha.
Yes, thank you. One more question. In addition to supporting traditional techniques, looking at network participants with humanity allow us to understand their particularities. Could you bring a little about the context of supporting women within Motif's work in a country where abuse against women is still very present?
Yeah, it's thank you very much, Julia. This is a really important factor, and in a sense something to what Dr. James touched on in terms of the access that women have to the funds, the payment for their work. And I think this is something that as ethical designers, ethical brands, we need to go around with our eyes open. We need to go around with this understanding that we are part of the system. And what is it that our part is to be able to serve and to make a sustainable impact? For myself, it was a few years ago, I was just randomly, it ended up that I was introduced to a group of young women who had been rescued from a local brothel. They were in a government shelter. They'd been rescued because they were underage. They were in a government shelter, and I can tell you that they were literally hopeless. Their faces were just blank. And they were there because they couldn't be reunited with their families for all kinds of reasons, but that's where they were. And knowing the resources that I had at my disposal, the question was, because I wasn't there with the intention of being introduced to them to be able to introduce some kind of work into the system. So do I just step away and say, that's awful, and try and get somebody else involved? Or what do I do? So I did. I thought very strongly it was important to make some kind of a connection. And I rooted around locally, find out what raw materials were available, was able to get in touch with the girls and sit with them and see what kind of skills they already had. and just started to create. I actually did a range of scarves with them at first, very simple. And I can tell you the impact of respectful work, of respected and respectful work. It's a spiritual thing. It's a sacred thing to have work that you know you have been completely responsible for and being rewarded for. And, you know, it was a year or so later when I went back again, and their faces were just absolutely the opposite. I mean, they were laughing, they were teasing each other. It was just great to see the impact, you know, not only with the actual work, but, you know, there was a woman there who, she just loved them to pieces, got their quality sorted out. She was strict with them, but, you know, she loved them. And so it was just this whole recognition that work, as Dr. James was speaking to as well, when we can actually create with our own hands and earn our own living, there's a different measure of ownership and of self-worth that develops as a result of that. And so, yeah, just generating opportunities for women is a really big part of what Motif is about. Not to the exclusion of men, because we firmly believe there are many men who are able to be strong leaders in their households who can't because of lack of work. And so we want to be able to ensure that balance is maintained. But definitely there are women who have been sidelined dramatically that we are looking to bring in so that they too can be part of the growth of their own futures. So yeah, so those scarf designs are now yardage fabric that's available on our website as well. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you all for being here. I would love to just keep myself here, hearing you for more like through 2 hours. I have to finish now, and thank you a lot for this conversation and for you doing Motif and Naturtex. I'll get out here really inspired, and I think we need to be constantly inspired to stay strong for create possibles and transformative paths of fashion. So thank you. You inspired my day and my beliefs. And do you want to say something or add something or say goodbye? Oh, it's up to you.
I'll just say thank you so much for this incredible opportunity, Julia, and for all at the Brasil Eco Fashion Center. You've got incredible resources, I know, and this has been a super opportunity. I've really appreciated being able to share the space again with Dr. James. And yeah, I look forward to whenever we might be able to do it again. But like you, I could sit here and chat together for another few hours, but thank you very, very much for this time, and trust it's been a help and, like you say, an encouragement and inspiration for everybody else to really keep on, because that's what it takes. It's tenacity and determination. And yeah, we'll stick at it and we'll get there. Thank you so much. Thanks.
And there's, again, the inspiration we have received from Jackie and from the groups with which she's working in Bangladesh. I hope I can transmit them. I will transmit them to the indigenous and peasant groups with whom Matrix has been working for 30 or 40 years, so they can see that they're not alone. They'll look at the images, they'll not understand really the language, but they'll know that others are working with their hands with beautiful materials, creating products that stand out. And again, just as Jackie went back to those poor enslaved ex-slaves workers and found life in their countenances once again. That is the most important end product of this whole journey, is recovering people's self-esteem and self-sustainability. All I wanted to say is we have to think and do as Simon does. I put on a little bit of everything because we make it. I have a hat in natural brown cotton. I have a button-down shirt with Pima cotton. I have a bit of alpaca here that we use, and our masks are made with copper that are hand introduced into the yarns themselves. I'm wearing a pair of pants I got at a thrift store outside of New York for $3.50. And usually you have our blue jeans. This was the first free trade. This was introduced at London in 2005. The first free trade, fair trade organic blue jean. It went to High Street. One of my favorite projects is where the indigenous children are painting these quenes, which are the motifs, with the historic cosmovision that they still transmit intergenerationally. What we did here was to ask them to tie-dye and to paint with a shibori type technique. The rectangles, and we exported them to Portugal, where John Varvatos, a well-known high street men's shoe brand, created these sneakers. And you can see that, maybe you can see the designs there from the Shipibo Indians of the Amazon, where also, I don't have the sneaker here, but the original latex, which you have in Brazil, remember?
Yes.
I can't remember the name in Portuguese, but the latex from the jungle is extracted and refined and sent along with the uppers to Portugal, where they join the latex from the rubber with a drug-free cotton with the shibori dye together to create a rather expensive sneaker. But that's how you can probably get through a number of technological hurdles without losing the essential DNA. We have drug-free Amazon cotton prepared by indigenous people who then dye the fabric swatches and incorporate them in a product which pretty much stands out on its own. We love to do that. Jackie does that. I'm sure there are many more organizations that are trying to do that, but it's thanks to Julia and this Ecotece NGO that allows us to be seen and heard. So thank you, Julia. Thank you, Ecotece. Thank you, all the teams. As Jackie said, hopefully we'll be invited back for part 2.
Yes. Okay, so we are ending our conversation, our beautiful conversation. And now I'm gonna finish the conversation in Portuguese, right? Bom, então encerramos nossa roda de conversa, que foi uma delícia, junto com Jack Carlett e Dr. James Vreeland. Eles nos contaram um pouco sobre essa experiência fabulosa, que é da Motif e da Naturtex. E vocês podem conferir a programação completa do evento, que segue até o dia 30 de setembro, em brasilecofashion.com.br. Foi um prazer. Was a nice moment here. Nice to meet you. Bye bye.